All right, this one is The Fairy in the Pantry, as written by a Jess Steele. No one liked Mrs. Watson. She moved in a few houses away from me a couple weeks ago, and she was already the nut of the neighborhood. She was 30 years old, yet believed in things like Santa Claus and mermaids. She even looked like her reputation would suggest. She wore a tinfoil hat to the grocery store because apparently aliens were trying to read her mind, and a raggedy dress that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair was long, straight, and plain, and she never wore makeup underneath her glasses. She rarely came out of her house, only to get food or to go to the local craft store to buy a bunch of glitter for who knows what. When my friends and I would see her walking down the sidewalk, we would call it a sighting, as if it was Bigfoot. We'd walk behind her without her noticing and make fun of the way she walked. However, no matter how weird Miss Watson was, my parents still thought it'd be nice for me to bring over her some welcome to the neighborhood cookies. My mother told me to hand deliver them to the door. But what if she snatches me and keeps me in her dungeon in her basement? I mentioned to my parents, because that seemed like a logical possibility. Don't be silly. Now go, my mother said, not looking up from her pot where she was cooking on the stove. I rolled my eyes and made my way to the door. My steps towards Miss Watson's house grew heavier and heavier as I walked, dreading having to meet the woman face to face. I hoped the distance between our houses was longer than it actually was. However, if anything, it was shorter than expected. Her house looked like all the other houses in the cookie-cutter neighborhood. Tall, lots of windows, and painted a neutral color. The difference between the other houses and hers, though, was there were these little fairy houses built on the side. They were well built, I had to admit, and I put down the plate of cookies to go down on my hands and knees and take a look. If you looked inside them through the tiny windows, you could see little rooms made from sticks and leaves. I couldn't help but be impressed at all the details. There were little acorns used as bowls on a table made from bark, and a leaf as a blanket, and a mushroom as a pillow on the beds. And there was a neat pathway to the door made from pebbles. The house was beautiful. It reminded me when I was 6 years old, which wasn't that long ago, when I used to build fairy houses of my own. Though the fairy houses I built were nothing in comparison to the ones Mrs. Watson made. I picked up the cookies, and I got up after a moment, and walked up to Mrs. Watson's door. I found myself eager to knock on the door, instead of the dread I was feeling before. I knocked lightly, not noticing the hint of a smile on my face, while I still gazed over at the fairy houses. An undeniable noise of a squeaky chair and footsteps were coming from the other side of the door as I turned my attention back to Mrs. Watson's house. The door opened, and the smell of baked goods waved out of the house as Mrs. Watson stood in front of me. She didn't have her tinfoil hat on, luckily, but was wearing her usual oversized dress and thick glasses. Her hair was up in a low ponytail, which was different from the way she usually had it down. "Hello, dear. What can I do for you?" Her voice was sweeter than I thought it'd be. She looked at me with such innocence and curiosity. Shame then flooded my senses. I felt bad for the way my friends and I had been treating her. I was so used to making fun of this woman, I sort of forgot she was a person, too. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said as I presented the cookies to her. The smile she gave me was so large and happy, I wondered if I was the only one who had been friendly to her so far. She took the cookies, let out a child's laugh. "Thank you so much, sweetie. Would you like to come in for some tea, and we can eat these cookies?" I hesitated. I figured she would ask me in, but I didn't know if I wanted to go into the crazy lady's house. I might have been feeling a bit guilty for the way I had been making fun of her, but that didn't mean I was willing to sit and have tea with her. For all I knew, she would go on and on about something made up, and I would have to sit there and listen. But I looked at her face, how joyful and young she looked all of a sudden, and shrugged. So what? If it was going to be 20 minutes of my life, I would just drink the tea, have a cookie, say thank you, and leave. No big deal. "Sure," I finally said. The amount of cheer that sparked from her whole body stunned me for a moment. "Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Come on in." I walked into her house, and the smell of baked goods got stronger. "What are you making?" I asked her as I took in the rest of the house. The walls were covered with elegant paintings of fairy tale creatures. Mermaids, phoenixes, fairies, unicorns, elves, you name it. The paintings looked professional, and the amount of detail in the fairy houses outside were mirrored in the paintings. "I'm making a pie, but now I won't have room for it in my belly after these delicious cookies," she chuckled. I wasn't paying any attention to what she was saying. "Who made these?" I questioned, pointing at a painting of a dragon roaring on the edge of a cliff into the moon. You could see each and every scale on the dragon, and I could not stop staring at it. "I did. I dabble in painting." She shrugged it off like it wasn't any big deal. "You painted all of these?" I whipped my head back around to look at Miss Watson, amazement in my eyes. "Why, yes, I did," was her response, as she made her way into the kitchen. I followed her, my jaw dropping as I said nothing else. The kitchen was large and filled with light from the windows, just like mine. However, hers was stacked with plants all over the place, by the windows and even a few hanging from the ceilings. Succulents, flowers, it brought a peaceful aura to the room. "I love your home, Miss Watson," I said, meaning it. "Why, thank you, sweetheart. You can call me Heather," she said, grabbing the kettle from the stove, and 2 little white cups. She poured the water into the cups, and tiny streams of steam came from the surface. She put 2 tea bags in the cups and made her way to the table. I sat down with her, holding the cup in my hands as she placed the plate of cookies in the middle between us both. "So, how do you like living here so far?" I asked, not quite sure what to talk about. Even if she wasn't the crazy character that everyone had made her out to be, she was still an adult and I was just some kid. I couldn't help but feel a bit intimidated. "Oh, why, I love it here. It's so warm and cute," she started, but was interrupted by a clanging noise. I peered over her shoulder from where it was coming from. The noise's source was coming from the door behind her that I assumed was a pantry. What was that? I said, a drop of fear settling in my stomach. Was it a rat? Did this woman keep rats in her house? Heather sighed. Oh, don't worry about that, sweetie. Would you like one of your cookies? I kept looking at the door as another sound came from it. It sounded like someone was trying to pick up something, but kept dropping it to the floor. Do you have mice? I said, scratching the back of my neck. Why, no, of course not. Then what was that noise? Heather looked at the door and sighed again. When she looked back at me, all the fear left me. She gave me the most sincere smile a person has ever given me. Can you keep a secret? She whispered. I nodded, intrigued as she nodded back. You can't tell anyone. Pinky promise? She held out her pinky, from which I grabbed with my own, and said, I promise. It seemed to satisfy her enough. She went over to the pantry and opened the door. It was a deep pantry and held plenty of food. Canned soups, boxes of cereal, small jars of sugar and salt. There were a few cups of applesauce on the ground, which I guessed what was making the noise before. But the food wasn't what I was interested in. A little person, about 2 or 3 inches tall, was flying in the middle of the pantry, holding a cup of applesauce. My eyes grew huge. The small person had wings and a dress that looked like it was made from weaved grass. The small person grinned, and my jaw dropped once again. That's... I started but couldn't finish. It's a fairy, sweetie, Heather said, smiling as well. I got up from my seat and moved closer to look at it more. It had blonde hair that was tied up in a bun and blue shoes on its feet. I couldn't tell for sure, but I thought it had blue eyes and freckles. The fairy flew closer to me, and I jerked my head back. Whoa, I managed to say. Don't worry, hon, she's friendly, Heather said, pointing at the fairy. I didn't know what to do. I stopped believing in fairies quite recently, feeling like I finally grew out of that childish stage. But there was one, right in front of my face. The fairy flew slowly, inch by inch, until it was only a foot away from me. It tilted its head to the side, and I did too. Suddenly, a genuine laugh bubbled from my gut, and I couldn't help but giggle out loud. It's a fairy, I exclaimed. Yes, Heather said, joining my laughter. The fairy also started to laugh, and we all laughed, looking silly. This is amazing, I said. Heather nodded. How did this happen? I kept looking at the fairy. Well, why, I built these houses outside, and this adorable one showed up. I invited her inside, and she stayed ever since. She loves it here. I have so many sugary things, she just eats that stuff up, Heather explained. I couldn't stop smiling. It's amazing, I said once again. Why, yes it is. But why did she show up to your fairy house, and why not mine? I said, confused. The fairy flew back into the pantry to grab the applesauce and flew to the table. Heather shrugged. I don't know. She doesn't talk. Maybe they did show up to your fairy home, but I just happened to catch her before she left. I nodded, just accepting that story. I didn't really care much. still astonished by the fairy that was now eating applesauce and taking a bite out of one of the cookies. "You can't tell anyone," Heather said. I nodded. "Of course, I won't tell a soul." I felt special. She trusted me to keep such a secret. Heather smiled at me and sat back down at the table to take a sip of her tea. "You're welcome to come any time and see this little one if you'd like." I sat down too, took a sip of my tea. "I'd love that." I paused. "Does that mean all the other stuff is true, too?" Heather grinned. "Oh, yes. Oh, yes, in fact, I know where we can meet a mermaid." I smiled back. I felt I had entered another world of fantasy. "Can I see?" That was The Fairy in the Pantry, as written by a Jess Steele. This one is called Annabelle versus the Monster Under the Bed. "Okay, Anna, it's time for bed." Mommy closed the book she had been reading and stood up, plopping Annabelle on her feet. Annabelle really wanted to hear the rest of the story, but she yawned before she could complain. Maybe Mommy was right. Annabelle started to skip down the hallway to Mommy's room before she remembered. "Big girls sleep in their own beds, Annabelle," Mommy had said. "Don't worry about monsters. I'll check under the bed and keep you safe." Annabelle had pinky promised Mommy that she would sleep in her own bed tonight. And everybody knows you can't break a pinky promise. Annabelle had only made that promise after Mommy said she would let her wear her Batgirl costume to bed instead of her pajamas. Batgirl was brave, and Annabelle wasn't afraid of anything when she was Batgirl. At the end of the hall, Annabelle took a deep breath and turned into her room instead of Mommy's. She glared at her pretty white bed with its fluffy pink comforter. "I'm a big girl," she grumbled. "Yes, you are." Mommy came into the room behind her. She smiled and gave Annabelle a hug. It always made her feel better. "I'm so proud of you." Annabelle smiled. She liked making her mommy proud. She took off her hearing aids, or her ear buddies, as she and her mommy called them, and brushed her hair. Mommy tucked her in and then said their nighttime prayers. Then it was time for Mommy to check under the bed. Annabelle's tummy grumbled, and she shivered. She snuggled deep under her covers and refused to be scared. Even if there was a monster under the bed, her mommy could take him. "No monsters under here," Mommy announced. Annabelle was happy at first, but then she remembered something. Benjamin at school had said that a grown-up can't see monsters. She pouted, and her mommy laughed. "I promise. No monster's going to get you." She kissed Annabelle on the forehead and tucked her under the covers tightly around her. "I love you, princess." "Love you too, Mommy." Mommy turned out the light and shut the door, leaving Annabelle alone for the night. The room looked different in the pink glow of her nightlight. Shadows seemed to dance on the wall, the floor, and the ceiling. Annabelle felt her tummy gurgle again. She squeezed her eyes shut tight. "I am a big girl. I'm not afraid," she whispered to herself. She pulled her blanket over her head. Then she heard it. There was a soft rustling noise under the bed. She tried to ignore it. Mommy said that sometimes when we're scared, our imagination tricks us. Annabelle didn't think it was very nice of her imagination. She tried to force herself to fall asleep, humming Let It Go over and over again in her blanket cocoon. It was no use. The rustling kept getting louder. Suddenly, Annabelle was angry. This was her room. Who did this monster think he was? She was a big girl. More than that, right now, she was Batgirl. Annabelle kicked off her covers and hopped to the floor. She crouched down and glared into the shadows under her bed, hands bunched into angry fists. "Hey," she hissed, not wanting to wake Mommy. "This is my room. I'm not some baby you can scare off. I'm 5. She thrust her palm forward, fingers spread wide. "You have to leave right now. I'm not afraid of you." Big orange eyes blinked open in the dark, and Annabelle jumped back. She didn't scream, though. She was startled, but not scared. Because the eyes weren't actually scary. They looked like a cartoon. "You're not," a small voice whispered. At least, that's what Annabelle thought it said. It was hard to tell in the dark, when she couldn't see its mouth move. She told the monster to wait there and ran to the dresser. She popped her purple, sparkly earbuddies into her ears and turned them on. "What?" she asked. "You're not afraid of me?" "Oh, nope." Annabelle popped the pea. "I'm a superhero. So you better go scare some other kid." "But I don't want to scare anybody," the monster grumbled. Annabelle sighed, exasperated. "Look, can you just come out here? I'm having a hard time hearing you in the dark." There was a shuffling noise. A bright green hand flopped out from under her bed, and then another. They almost looked like paws, Annabelle thought. They were fuzzy, with 4 stubby fingers tipped with tiny claws. She saw its arms next. They were long and yellow, skinny like noodles. He pulled himself out from under her bed. The monster stood in front of Annabelle, orange eyes blinking owlishly in the pink light. He was shorter than she was, with a fuzzy red body shaped like a potato. His arms reached all the way down to the floor where his green hands rested next to his bright green feet. Annabelle couldn't even see the monster's legs through his fur. He was so short. She burst out laughing. The monster frowned, and he turned to go back under the bed. "Well, if you're just going to make fun of me." Annabelle felt bad and stopped laughing. She didn't mean to hurt his feelings. She grabbed his soft green paw to stop him. "No, don't go. I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean to laugh. Benjamin just said monsters were big and scary, and that they ate little girls. But you're not scary. You're cute." Annabelle thought the monster blushed under his fur. He even seemed to smile a little. "Who's Benjamin?" he asked. Annabelle shrugged. "A boy at school." "Well, Benjamin sounds stupid." Annabelle giggled and clapped her hands over her mouth. She wasn't allowed to call people stupid. But maybe the monster's mommy said that was okay. "What's your name?" she asked. The monster looked confused. "I don't think I have one of those. Do you?" "Of course. I'm Annabelle," she said. She'd never heard of somebody not having a name. "If you don't have a name, what do your parents and friends call you?" "Oh, I don't have any of those either, the monster said. It made Annabelle sad. She wanted to give the monster a hug, but knew it wasn't polite to hug people without asking. She guessed it was true of monsters also. Then she had another idea. I can be your friend, if you want, she said. The monster perked up at that. Really? Annabelle laughed. Of course, we can play games and tell each other stories. The monster grinned. He had 2 big teeth, one on top and one on bottom. That sounds like fun. You'll need a name, Annabelle said. Annabelle loved naming things. She had named her puppy Leo, and all her stuffed animals had their own names too. She looked at the monster for a few seconds, thinking hard. I think you look like a Roger. Annabelle did a motion with her hand when she said it. Her first and second fingers crossed, and the monster looked confused. What is that? He made the same motion with his paw. It's your name. Annabelle did it again. Roger, in sign. Sometimes it's hard to hear people talk, so I use my hands to talk too. Like this. Your name is Roger. The monster watched her hands move with wide eyes. That's so neat, he said. Is there a sign for Annabelle? Yeah, I'll teach you. She showed the monster how to sign her name. He grinned his 2-toothed smile. You'll have to teach me how to say more things in sign. Annabelle smiled. Of course, Roger. She suddenly realized she hadn't asked the monster if she should call him that. Is that okay? Do you like the name? Oh, the monster exclaimed. He had been so interested in learning the signs that she had been making that he had forgotten. Yes, it's a very good name, Roger. I can be Roger. Awesome, Annabelle said, empathetically. I'm glad you're not a scary monster, Roger. Roger laughed, a low, pleasant, rumbly sound. Me too. She and Roger stayed awake for a little while longer. They sat on the floor and played with Annabelle's stuffed animals. She showed Roger her ear buddies, and she taught him how to sign more words. She told him all about kindergarten and her mommy and her puppy Leo. Before long, her eyes started getting heavy, and she learned more and more to the side. She almost toppled over, but Roger caught her with a noodly arm. I think you should go to bed, Annabelle. Annabelle pouted, but she knew he was right. She couldn't stop yawning, and she had to get up early for school tomorrow. Will you come back tomorrow night? She asked hopefully. Of course, now that I have a friend, Roger said. He helped her stand up and tucked her back into bed. That's good, Annabelle sighed. Her eyes were already closed. I'm glad I met you, Roger. Me too, Annabelle, he said. Sleep tight. He patted her hand with a big fuzzy paw. Annabelle smiled, and Roger slid back under the bed to wherever monsters go to sleep. Annabelle couldn't wait to tell Benjamin that he was wrong at school tomorrow. And Mommy would be proud of her for making a new friend. No longer scared of monsters or the dark, she drifted off to sleep to dream about the new friend's big orange eyes. And that was a short story, Annabelle versus the monster under the bed.